In every shining tower, behind polished glass and marble floors, there are people we rarely notice. They move quietly, sweeping away dust, wiping fingerprints from doors, making sure the world looks spotless for those in suits and ties. One of them was Diane Porter. At 38, she wore a bright yellow work shirt and pushed a cart filled with mops and buckets. To most, she was invisible, just another worker passing in the background. But those who looked closer would see something different in her eyes, a calm that came from surviving storms few could imagine. For 20 years, Diane had worn another uniform. She had marched through deserts, carried wounded brothers off battlefields, and earned medals that rested silently in a box under her bed. She came home searching for peace, believing that civilian life could finally give her the quiet she longed for. But peace does not come easily to those who carry scars. And sometimes, the battlefield follows you home in unexpected ways. Standing opposite her was Harrison Steele, heir to a fortune, dressed in tailored Italian suits, a man who measured worth in money and power. To him, Diane was nothing more than a janitor, black, female, working class, someone he believed could be humiliated without consequence. On that morning, in the marble lobby of his corporate empire, Harrison leaned close, his words sharp enough to cut. "Remember your place, Porter. People like you don't belong among people like me." Everyone around pretended not to hear. Phones lit up, shoes shuffled, eyes avoided. But Diane stood tall, her voice steady, her dignity unbroken. "My place," she said softly, "is wherever I work with honesty and honor, same as anyone else." That single sentence changed everything. What looked like a simple workplace insult was in fact the first spark of a war not fought with armies, but with dignity, courage, and the truth about justice in the face of prejudice. And this is where our story begins. It began in the quiet of a parking garage, the kind of place where every sound echoes a little louder, where footsteps bounce against concrete walls and shadows stretch longer than they should. For most people, it was just another workday evening. The hum of fluorescent lights, the faint smell of gasoline, the steady rhythm of tires rolling out into the night. But for Diane Porter, this moment would change everything. She had just finished her shift, 38 years old, wearing her bright yellow work shirt, hands still calloused from scrubbing marble floors that would gleam again by sunrise. To the world above her, she was invisible, just a janitor. A black woman whose presence blended into the background, whose labor was noticed only when something was missed. But that night, someone noticed her in a different way. Her back hit the cold concrete pillar, her breath cut short. Harrison leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper that carried across the still air. "People like you should never forget their place." Those words weren't random. They were centuries old, dressed up in modern arrogance. They carried the weight of plantations and segregated schools, of office whispers and glass ceilings. Harrison wasn't just attacking Diane's dignity in that moment, he was channeling a long history of prejudice that had always told black women they were less, that their worth ended where a man like him began. But Diane's eyes, they told a different story. There was no begging, no fear, no desperate search for mercy. Her eyes were steady, cold, unwavering. The kind of eyes that had once scanned battlefields in Afghanistan, the kind that had calculated angles of fire, escape routes, and survival odds. Harrison thought he had cornered a janitor. What he didn't know was that his hands were on the throat of a soldier who had stared death in the face and survived. This moment, the grip, the insult, the silence of the garage was more than a personal attack. It was the inciting incident of a larger battle. And it revealed something ugly, not just about one man, but about the system that allowed him to believe he could do this and get away with it. For years, Harrison had walked marble hallways as if they were his kingdom. He had smirked at employees who lowered their gaze, dismissed complaints as noise, and silenced those who dared to resist. He thought power insulated him. Money gave him permission. Skin color guaranteed his superiority. And to an outsider, maybe it did. Because let's be honest, how many times have we seen stories just like this? A worker humiliated, a voice silenced, a body cornered in some dimly lit space where witnesses look away? It happens in boardrooms, in classrooms, on sidewalks where police stop the wrong person. Racism doesn't always announce itself with slurs. Sometimes, it slips in through tone, through posture, through the quiet belief that some people simply don't belong. But Diane belonged. She belonged because she worked with integrity. She belonged because her life was built on service and sacrifice. She belonged because no man's prejudice could erase the worth she carried inside. And in that instant, pressed against concrete, her silence was not weakness. It was calculation. She had faced men with rifles who wanted her dead. This was not fear. This was strategy. Harrison misread that silence. He thought it was submission. He thought his lesson had landed. But the truth was, he had just awakened something he could not control. When he finally let go and stepped back, Diane didn't stumble. She didn't collapse into tears or beg him to stop. She straightened her shoulders, drew in a slow breath, and fixed him with a gaze that made his smirk falter for just a second. In that tiny flicker of hesitation, the balance shifted. It was still invisible to everyone else, but in Diane's heart, the battle lines had been drawn. Now, why does this matter? Because racism often hides in plain sight. It happens in polished lobbies where executives wear masks of civility. It happens in offices where complaints vanish into HR files that never see daylight. It happens in parking garages where a powerful man believes a janitor has no voice. But when one person decides not to accept it, not to break, not to retreat, that's when history bends. That's when silence becomes defiance. Diane didn't fight back that night, not with fists, not with fury, but she fought in another way. She refused to let him see fear. She refused to give him the satisfaction of humiliation. That small act of resistance may seem insignificant, but it was the first domino in a chain that would topple everything Harrison thought untouchable. And there's a lesson here for all of us. When someone tries to reduce your worth to the color of your skin, the uniform you wear, or the title on your paycheck, remember Diane. She didn't have a corner office, a six-figure salary, or a powerful last name. What she had was dignity, and sometimes dignity is the sharpest weapon. So the story begins with a hand on a throat, a racist whisper in the dark, and a silence that spoke louder than screams. But it doesn't end there, because for Diane Porter, this was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning of a fight that would expose not just Harrison, but the entire system that protected men like him. And as the echoes of that parking garage moment faded into the night, Diane already knew one truth that Harrison had yet to learn. Some battles choose you, whether you want them or not. And when they do, the only way forward is to fight. That night was just the first spark. The real fire was yet to come. And in the marble lobby of Steel Industries, beneath chandeliers and polished floors, the next confrontation would reveal just how dangerous it is when prejudice collides with a woman who refuses to be broken. Morning light poured through the tall glass windows of Steel Industries, turning the marble floors into mirrors that reflected the grandeur of wealth. Executives hurried across the lobby, polished shoes clicking like a metronome of privilege. Phones buzzed, briefcases swung, conversations hummed with numbers and deals. In this world, appearances were everything, and appearances dictated that Diane Porter did not belong. She was there as she always was, cart rolling steadily, yellow work shirt tucked neatly, hair tied back beneath a bright bandana. Her mop glided across the floor in practiced strokes, erasing footprints before they had the chance to settle. To most, she was invisible background noise, part of the architecture, as unnoticed as the chandelier hanging high above. But inside, Diane was scanning the lobby with the quiet awareness of a soldier. Angles, exits, potential threats. It was habit now, an instinct she couldn't shut off. The elevator chimed, a sound so ordinary, but this time it carried the weight of confrontation. Harrison Steele stepped out with two executives trailing him, both eager to laugh at the right moments, to nod at the right cues. Harrison's Italian suit caught the light like armor, his cologne drifting ahead of him like a proclamation of superiority. His pale eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Our resident philosopher. Tell me, Diane, do you have wisdom for quarterly projections, or should we stick to mop techniques?" The executives chuckled nervously, unsure whether to commit to the mockery. The lobby quieted as people found excuses to linger, eyes lowered but ears open. It wasn't the first time Harrison had staged such a performance. He loved the spectacle, loved reminding everyone of the hierarchy, him above, others below, and Diane at the very bottom. Diane straightened, standing eye to eye with him. "I don't have opinions about your business, Mr. Steele," she said evenly. I'm here to do my job." "Your job," Harrison repeated, stepping closer, his voice like a blade, "is to clean up messes, not to create them with your attitude." The words rippled through the lobby. Phones suddenly needed checking, watches suddenly fascinating. Employees looked away, but no one left. Everyone knew this had become the morning's show. "I've never been disrespectful to you, sir," Diane replied, her voice steady though her chest burned. Harrison's smile was cold. "Disrespect isn't always about words, Diane. Sometimes it's about forgetting your place." Those words, forgetting your place, landed like a slap. They weren't just about her job. They were about her race, her gender, her very existence in his world. They carried the echo of every drill sergeant who had doubted her in the army, every officer who had told her she didn't belong in special forces, every civilian who had assumed she was less than capable. It was racism dressed in silk, classism disguised as management, prejudice wrapped in authority. Diane could have stayed silent. She could have let the moment pass. But something inside her refused to bow. She had not endured mortar fire and roadside bombs only to kneel in a marble lobby before a spoiled heir. "My place," Diane said, her voice clear and strong, "is wherever I'm doing honest work to support myself, same as anyone else." Silence fell like a curtain. The executives froze. The security guard by the front desk shifted nervously. Even the receptionist's fingers stilled above her keyboard. The words were simple, but they carried the quiet authority of a woman who had commanded respect in life or death situations. Harrison's face reddened. He had expected submission, maybe stammering, maybe tears. Instead, Diane had turned his stage into hers. And worse, the audience was listening. Employees who had long endured his arrogance were watching her stand tall. Some even nodded subtly in agreement. "You think you're clever," Harrison hissed, stepping so close she could feel his breath. "You think a smart mouth makes you my equal? Because a few employees smiled at your little speech, you think you've won?" "I think," Diane said, refusing to flinch, "that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their job title." His eyes narrowed to slits. The quiet nods from others in the lobby, the small ripple of approval for her words, it was humiliation. And Harrison Steele did not tolerate humiliation. In that moment, the battle lines deepened. He could not allow this janitor, this black woman, to undermine his authority in front of his empire. "We'll see about that," he muttered, his voice low but dangerous. With a sharp turn, he stalked toward the elevators, his entourage scurrying behind. The lobby exhaled. Phones lit up again, conversations resumed, footsteps tapped nervously against the marble. But nothing was the same. The performance had shifted. Harrison had meant to display his dominance. Instead, Diane had displayed her dignity. And dignity is a contagious thing. As Diane returned to her cart, her movements calm but her heart pounding, she felt every instinct sharpen. 20 years of service had taught her to recognize a threat assessment. Harrison wasn't just angry. He was humiliated. And men like him didn't forget humiliation. They retaliated. She wrung out her mop with more force than necessary, whispering to herself, "Some battles aren't worth fighting." But even as the words left her lips, another voice inside the soldier's voice answered, "Some battles you can't avoid." That day, the marble lobby of Steel Industries became more than just a corporate stage. It became a battlefield. One where prejudice had spoken, dignity had answered, and the war for respect had only just begun. And while Harrison Steele retreated into his office to plot his next move, Diane Porter resumed her quiet labor, polishing stone floors with the same care she had once polished her rifle. To everyone else, it looked like business as usual, but to her, it was preparation. She knew the enemy now. She knew what was coming. And somewhere deep in her soldier's soul, she was already preparing for war. Because racism doesn't stop when the words end. It festers in silence, grows in the shadows, and waits for its moment to strike again. Diane knew that better than anyone, and the next time Harrison came for her, it wouldn't just be words in a lobby. It would be something darker, something dangerous. But she was ready. She had always been ready. And with that, the marble lobby showdown faded into memory, but only as the prelude to a storm still gathering on the horizon. The sun had set, and the tower of Steel Industries glowed like a beacon against the Atlanta night. Most employees had gone home, their footsteps long faded from the marble floors. But on the 32nd floor, in an office lined with black wood and framed degrees, the air was heavy with something darker than paperwork. Harrison Steele sat behind his desk, tie loosened, fingers drumming on polished wood. He replayed the lobby scene again and again in his mind. Diane's voice, calm and unwavering, echoed like a curse. My place is wherever I'm doing honest work. The audacity, the humiliation, the way other employees had dared to nod along. It was more than defiance. It was contamination. If one janitor could make him look weak, what would stop others from following? He picked up his phone, scrolled to a number he had never thought he would use. Tony Castellano. A name whispered at country clubs and backroom bars. A man with the kind of reputation that made problems disappear. Harrison hesitated for half a heartbeat, then pressed call. "Steele!" Tony's gravel voice answered after 2 rings. "What can I do for you?" "I have an employee," Harrison said slowly, choosing each word like a blade. "She's forgotten her place." "I need her," reminded. There was a pause, the kind of silence that tested commitment. "Are we talking a message?" Tony asked. "Or something permanent?" Harrison swallowed hard. A message, strong enough that she never challenges me again. The deal was struck that night. $5,000 in cash, delivered in a worn leather briefcase. A meeting in the warehouse district, where broken buildings swallowed secrets whole. 6 men, hardened by years of violence, agreed to pay Diane Porter a visit. To them, she was just a name, a target, a job. To Harrison, she was the ghost of humiliation he needed to erase. But what he didn't know was that Diane was already preparing. Down in her small apartment, Diane sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, the footlocker of her military years open before her. Inside lay medals that shone even in the dim light. A purple heart, a bronze star, ribbons telling the story of battles survived. She ran her fingers across the cool metal, memories pressing against her chest. Her unit in Afghanistan, the sound of mortars in the night. The names of friends etched forever in her journal, friends who never came home. She had tried to leave that life behind, tried to bury the soldier and become invisible. But the soldier was awake now. Harrison's words had stirred something she could not silence. And as she laced her fingers together, eyes closed, she whispered, "Not this time. I won't be broken again." A knock startled her. She checked the peephole. Angela Foster, young, nervous, glasses slipping down her nose, clutching a file folder like it was armor. Diane opened the door just a crack, chain still fastened. "Please," Angela said breathlessly. "I work in payroll. I overheard Harrison on the phone. He's planning something terrible." Diane let her in. Angela sat on the couch, words tumbling out in a rush. "He was talking to someone about sending a message. He said you'd learn your place tomorrow night. He didn't say your name, but it was obvious. Everyone knows what happened in the lobby. He can't stand that you embarrassed him." Diane studied her carefully. Nervous, yes, but sincere. The kind of sincerity born not of fear, but of conscience. "Why come to me?" Diane asked. "You could lose your job." Angela looked down at her hands. "My brother was killed in Iraq. He was a Marine. He died protecting his unit. When I heard Harrison, I thought of him. He always said courage means standing up when it's hardest. Watching you stand against Harrison, it reminded me of him." For a moment, Diane felt her throat tighten. She thought of her own fallen brothers, of the promises she had made to never let their sacrifices be in vain. "Thank you," she said softly. "But you need to stay out of this. Tonight you find somewhere safe. Tomorrow is mine." Angela shook her head. "He underestimates you, but I don't. I'll make sure others know the truth, if anything happens." Diane nodded. It was all she could ask. The next morning, whispers spread through the building like wildfire. Harrison had called an emergency meeting with Patricia Kim, the HR director. He demanded Diane's termination. Patricia, calm and firm, refused. "Her record is spotless," Patricia said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Not one complaint, not one tardy. Her work is impeccable." "She humiliated me in front of my employees," Harrison snapped. "She defended her dignity," Patricia countered. "That's not insubordination. That's courage." The words hung heavy in the air. For Patricia, it was more than paperwork. She had seen Diane treated with disdain for 2 years. She had stayed silent too long. Now, she would not. Harrison's jaw tightened. "You're out of line." "No," Patricia said evenly. "You are. And if you retaliate, it won't just be unethical, it will be illegal." But Harrison was beyond reason. He left the office with a threat, thinly veiled as a promise. That night, Diane returned to the 32nd floor. She pushed her cart as if it were any other shift, but every step was measured, every motion deliberate. She noted the angles of cameras, the timing of guard rotations, the blind spots in the parking garage, old habits, threat assessments, battlefield mapping. Civilian life might demand silence, but survival demanded vigilance. Jake Morrison, the security guard, intercepted her. "Something's not right," he murmured. "Cameras in the garage are scheduled for maintenance tomorrow night. That's not coincidence." Diane nodded. "He's coming for me." Jake looked stricken. "Then walk away. Please, find another job. Don't give him the chance." She shook her head. "I've never run from a bully. Not in uniform. Not now." Jake studied her face, realization dawning. She wasn't just a janitor. She was something far more dangerous to Harrison, a woman with nothing to lose, and the training to survive what was coming. That night, Diane opened the footlocker again. Beneath the medals and journals, wrapped in an old t-shirt, lay her service pistol. A Sig Sauer P, 320. The weight was familiar, the grip natural, the steel cold but comforting. She loaded it with calm precision, the sound of each bullet sliding into place echoing like a vow. She whispered to the empty room, "If he wants a war, he'll get one." And so, the conspiracy took shape. Above, Harrison plotted with criminals, convinced money could shield him. Below, Diane prepared with the patience of a soldier who had seen too much blood to be careless. Two worlds colliding, one built on arrogance, the other on survival. The marble tower stood silent that night, its glass walls reflecting the city lights. Inside, the pieces were moving into position, a spoiled heir with a fragile ego, a janitor with the heart of a warrior, and a company full of silent witnesses, some ready to betray, others ready to rise. Tomorrow, the shadows of the parking garage would no longer hide secrets. They would reveal them. And in that revelation, the true meaning of dignity and of racism's cost would come to light. Because some battles don't wait for you to choose. They find you. And when they do, only two choices remain: surrender or fight back. The night was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that makes every sound feel sharper, every shadow feel alive. On the security feed, the parking garage looked deserted. Empty rows of polished cars, fluorescent lights humming, concrete pillars casting long black streaks across the floor. But Diane Porter knew better. Silence wasn't safety. Silence was the stillness before a storm. She had timed everything. By 11 o'clock, the day shift was long gone, and even the few employees who lingered had headed home. Only her mop bucket, cleaning cart, and steady footsteps remained. To anyone else, it looked like another late night for an invisible worker. To Diane, it was reconnaissance. Every corner checked, every blind spot cataloged, every exit rehearsed in her mind. She didn't wear the yellow shirt tonight. Instead, dark jeans and a black sweater beneath her vest clothes that allowed her to move, to fight, to survive. Her radio crackled softly. Jake Morrison's voice came through, tense and low. 3 vehicles just pulled in. No reason for anyone to be here this late. "How many?" Diane whispered back, eyes fixed on the elevator doors. 6 men, maybe 7. They're not hiding. Her chest tightened, but her voice remained calm. "Then it's tonight." "Diane," Jake said urgently, "you can still leave. You can walk away." "No," she answered firmly. "Not tonight. Not ever again." She switched the radio off. She couldn't afford distraction. The soldier inside her had taken command. This wasn't janitorial work anymore. This was survival. From the far end of the garage came the echo of footsteps. A cluster of shadows emerged beneath the pale glow of overhead lights. Tony Castellano led them, thick-necked and broad, his smirk the kind of practiced menace that came from decades of intimidation. Beside him, Viper, a scarred man with brass knuckles gleaming in his hand. The rest fanned out, weapons tucked under jackets, confidence in every stride. "Diane Porter," Tony called, his voice rolling across the concrete like gravel in a storm drain. "We've got a message for you. You've been forgetting your place." There it was again, that word. Place. Always the same poison, recycled through centuries. It wasn't enough for men like Harrison and Tony that she worked hard, kept her head down, did her job. No, they needed her silent. They needed her small. They needed her to accept the myth that people like her were lesser. But Diane wasn't lesser. Not tonight, not ever again. She straightened, stepping away from her cart, her hands empty but her eyes blazing. "And what place is that?" she asked, her voice echoing steady against the walls. Tony's smirk widened. "On your knees, begging, knowing you're nothing more than the help." The words rippled through the garage, intended to cut, to humiliate. But Diane's silence was sharper. She didn't flinch. She didn't lower her gaze. She simply stood there, a lone figure facing 7 armed men, radiating the kind of calm that unnerved them more than fear ever could. "Well," Tony said, gesturing to his men, "let's educate her." The circle tightened. Heavy boots scraped against concrete. Weapons glinted under the lights. To them, this was routine, a paycheck, an easy job. Who could a janitor possibly be? But then Diane moved. With fluid precision, she flipped the fire extinguisher from her cart and pulled the pin. A white cloud of foam burst across the space, blinding, choking, disorienting. Shouts erupted. "Where is she?" one man yelled, stumbling in the mist. "I can't see!" By the time the foam settled, Diane was gone. "Fan out," Tony barked. "Find her." But Diane wasn't hiding. She was hunting. 20 years of training had rewired her brain. The garage wasn't a workplace anymore, it was a battlefield. She moved low, fast, using shadows as cover. One man rounded a pillar, pistol raised. Too slow. Diane's elbow drove into his solar plexus. The breath knocked clean out of him. She swept his legs, sending him crashing into the concrete. Another swung a tire iron. Diane ducked, swept her mop handle up, striking his jaw with a crack that echoed like gunfire. He dropped, weapon clattering across the floor. 2 down, 5 left. "Jesus," Viper muttered, eyes wide. "She knows what she's doing." "She's a janitor," Tony snapped, his confidence rattling but not yet broken. "Take her down." But the truth was dawning. She wasn't a janitor tonight. She was Staff Sergeant Porter, U.S. Army, decorated veteran, survivor of wars far deadlier than this garage. And every step she took, every strike she landed, told them they had stepped into the wrong fight. From above, the security cameras blinked awake. Unknown to the attackers, Tom Peterson from IT had rerouted the feeds, recording everything. Every insult, every blow, every glimpse of hired men converging on one black woman. Evidence they thought destroyed was now preserved forever. Across the building, Angela and Patricia watched the monitors, their faces pale but resolute. "She's not just surviving," Angela whispered. "She's winning." In the garage, the chaos grew. Another attacker lunged with a knife, but Diane sidestepped, slamming his head into a concrete pillar. Blood splattered, the sound of bone against stone sickening in its finality. Tony's voice rose in panic. "Use the guns!" The crack of gunfire shattered the garage. Bullets ricocheted, sparks flying, glass shattering. Diane rolled behind a parked car, her pulse steady, her mind calculating. She wasn't panicking. She was in her element. She checked her weapon, a Sig Sauer now drawn from her holster, 15 rounds, 1 chambered. She whispered to herself, the same words she had said overseas. Time to go to work. The men thought numbers would break her. They thought weapons guaranteed victory. But in their arrogance, they had forgotten the most important rule of survival. Never underestimate the one who refuses to die quietly. Diane peeked from cover, fired 2 precise shots. One man dropped, clutching his chest. Another stumbled, screaming as his shoulder shattered. 3 left. Viper's face twisted in rage. "She's not human," he roared. "No," Tony growled, fear trembling in his voice. "She's a soldier." The wail of alarms suddenly pierced the chaos. Sirens echoed from outside. Flashing red lights painted the garage walls. The police were coming. The ambush had failed. Evidence was secured. Harrison's conspiracy was crumbling before his eyes, even though he wasn't there to see it. But Diane didn't wait for sirens. She stepped out from cover, weapon leveled, voice thunderous with authority. "Drop your weapons! Hands on your head!" For a moment, the 3 survivors froze. They saw not a janitor, not even a woman, but a force, something unbreakable, something they could not conquer. And in that moment of hesitation, they realized what Harrison had never understood. Diane Porter was not a victim. She was justice waiting to be unleashed. The echoes of the garage that night would never leave them, nor would they leave the walls of Steel Industries, because this was no longer a story about one woman's dignity. This was the opening battle of a war that would expose corruption, racism, and arrogance at their core. And as Diane stood in the center of the chaos, heart pounding, weapon steady, she knew this truth. She had survived the trap in the garage. But the real fight, the one for justice, for dignity, for every worker who had ever been silenced, was only just beginning. The garage still smelled of gunpowder. Sirens wailed above as police cars clustered around the entrance, their flashing lights painting the concrete walls in frantic shades of red and blue. Officers swarmed the scene, weapons drawn, shouts echoing through the cavernous space. But in the middle of it all sat Diane Porter, calm, steady, her back straight as if she were still in uniform. 7 men had entered. Only 3 were left alive. The rest lay sprawled across the wet floor, their bodies twisted in defeat, their arrogance silenced forever. EMTs rushed past her, but their eyes lingered with something more than professional curiosity. They had heard rumors already, a janitor, alone, fighting back against a squad of hired muscle. A story too incredible to believe, until they saw her themselves. A black woman with a pistol at her side, unflinching in the chaos. Detective Ray Williams approached, his notepad tucked under one arm. "Ma'am," he began carefully, "are you Diane Porter?" "I am," she said quietly. "Can you tell me what happened here tonight?" Diane looked at him with eyes that had already seen too much. 7 armed men tried to take me down. I defended myself. 7 against 1. The detective's jaw tightened. Something in his face shifted skepticism, giving way to respect. "What's your background?" he asked. "United States Army. Special Forces. 20 years. The detective nodded slowly. It made sense now. This wasn't luck. This wasn't desperation. This was skill. But before Diane could say more, another voice cut through the noise. Harrison Steele, suit immaculate even in the middle of chaos, stormed past the barricade. His voice was sharp, his outrage perfectly rehearsed. "What the hell happened to my building? I demand to know why there are bodies in my garage." Detective Williams turned, his expression unreadable. "And you are?" "I'm Harrison Steele. I own 17% of this company, and I want answers." For just a second, his eyes locked on Diane. Rage, disbelief, fear. She wasn't broken. She wasn't gone. She was alive, standing, calm. And the look on his face, raw hatred mixed with humiliation, was evidence enough. "Mr. Steele," the detective said coolly, "were you expecting something to happen here tonight?" "Of course not," Harrison snapped. "This is absurd. Some janitor overreacts, and now my company's reputation is on the line?" But then Angela Foster stepped forward, laptop in hand, her hands shaking but her resolve steady. "Detective, you should see this." On the screen, grainy footage played. Harrison's meeting with Tony Castellano. The exchange of money. The instructions. Send her a message. Make her terrified enough, she'll never stand again. Every word recorded, every face clear. The color drained from Harrison's cheeks. That's fabricated," he sputtered. "They're conspiring against me. She's a violent criminal, and they're protecting her." Patricia Kim arrived next, folder thick with documents. "These are every complaint against Mr. Steele that was buried. Every NDA, every payout. He has a pattern, detective. Tonight was just the first time someone refused to stay silent." Jake Morrison stepped forward with his security logs, his voice unwavering. "And here are the maintenance orders. Cameras scheduled to be fixed the exact night these men showed up. Coincidence? I don't think so." Piece by piece, the story unfolded. Diane wasn't just fighting for her dignity anymore. The entire system of protection around Harrison Steele was unraveling. And for the first time, he realized he couldn't buy his way out. "Sir," the detective said firmly, "you have the right to remain silent." Handcuffs clicked. Gasps rippled through the garage. Harrison Steele, the man who had strutted through marble lobbies like a king, was led away in chains. His protests rang hollow, drowned by the weight of evidence. But the story didn't end in the garage. It was only beginning. By morning, whispers spread through the city. A janitor had stood against a millionaire. A black woman had survived an ambush and turned it into a victory. Videos leaked online. Hashtags lit up social media. Number Justice for Diane. Number Stand with Porter. Number no more silence. News anchors replayed the footage. Talk shows debated whether Diane was a hero or a vigilante. For every voice praising her courage, another questioned her restraint. Why was a janitor armed? Was she dangerous? Should she have fought back? The same old questions, recycled excuses for why victims are blamed for refusing to stay victims. But Diane didn't watch the coverage. She was back in her apartment, medals on the table, pistol cleaned and stored. For her, the war wasn't about trending hashtags. It was about something deeper. About every worker who had been silenced, every woman dismissed, every black employee humiliated in rooms where their voices carried no weight. Angela visited that morning. She set down 2 cups of coffee, her hands trembling. "The media is everywhere," she said. "Some are already twisting it, calling you unstable, saying you snapped." Diane looked at her steadily. "Let them. The truth has witnesses now. That's more than most people ever get." Angela nodded, tears in her eyes. "You remind me of my brother. He never backed down either, but it cost him everything." "It cost me too," Diane whispered. "But sometimes the cost is the only proof that dignity matters." That same day, Patricia Kim called an emergency meeting with trusted employees, maintenance staff, security guards, junior accountants, faces that had lived under Harrison's arrogance for years. They crowded into the break room, voices low, eyes nervous. "He tried to destroy her," Patricia said firmly. "And when he failed, he blamed her. But this isn't just about Diane. This is about all of us. How many of you have been disrespected, ignored, silenced?" Hands rose slowly at first, then all at once. The truth was out. Harrison's downfall had ignited something bigger: solidarity. Bobby Reynolds, the gruff maintenance supervisor, slammed his fist on the table. "That woman saved us all. If Harrison had gotten away with this, none of us would ever be safe. It's time we stand with her." For the first time in years, fear began to shift. Fear was no longer theirs to carry. Fear belonged to the man in handcuffs. And Diane? She didn't ask for any of it. She hadn't wanted to be a leader, a symbol, or a rallying cry. But life has a way of choosing its heroes. Not the ones who crave power, but the ones who refuse to surrender dignity. That night, as she sat by her window, city lights flickering in the distance, she thought of her fallen brothers overseas. She thought of every soldier who had died for the promise of justice. And she whispered a vow: "I will not let this be wasted. Not here, not now." The garage battle was over. Harrison was in custody. But Diane knew the war had only shifted fronts. The courtroom would come next. The headlines would sharpen. Racism never surrendered after one fight. It only regrouped. And as she closed her eyes, she felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It was everyone's. And she was ready to carry it. The courthouse in downtown Atlanta stood like a fortress of marble and iron, its towering columns promising justice, but echoing a history that often failed to deliver it to people who looked like Diane Porter. That morning, the plaza outside the courthouse swelled with voices, protesters chanting for accountability, news anchors live on camera, and curious citizens drawn by the story that had gripped the city. Signs waved high: "Justice for Diane. Workers deserve respect. No more harassment." Yet scattered among them were others more hostile. "Violent janitor. She went too far. Law and order means obedience." The division was clear. Diane's case wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what America saw when it looked at a black woman who fought back. Inside, Diane walked through the security checkpoint flanked by Jake Morrison and Angela Foster. She wore a navy blazer borrowed from Patricia, her medals tucked safely at home. No bandana, no work uniform, no mop bucket, just a woman standing tall in front of a system that wanted to judge not just her actions but her very existence. The courtroom buzzed with tension. On one side sat Harrison Steele, hair slicked back, suit perfectly tailored, hands cuffed but posture defiant. His lawyers whispered furiously, spreading papers across the defense table. On the other sat Diane with her small team: Patricia, Angela, Jake, all ordinary workers turned unlikely witnesses. Behind them, a sea of journalists scribbled notes, cameras flashed, pens tapped against notepads. The judge entered, a gavel strike silencing the chaos. Court is now in session. State of Georgia versus Harrison Steele. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen Monroe, rose first. Her voice was firm, precise. cutting through the room. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about power abused. It is about a man who believed his wealth and status gave him the right to harass, intimidate, and ultimately attempt to destroy an employee who dared to stand up for herself. This case is about justice for Diane Porter and for every worker who has been silenced by fear. Every word resonated. Diane sat still, her hands folded in her lap, but inside her heart hammered like a drum. When the defense attorney rose, the tone shifted. His voice was smooth, calculated, heavy with insinuation. This case is about perspective. A disgruntled janitor, armed and unstable, created a violent spectacle in a corporate garage. Yes, there was an altercation, but my client never ordered an attack. Miss Porter is a decorated veteran, yes, but also someone carrying trauma, someone who might perceive threats where none exist. He gestured subtly toward her. She is not a hero. She is dangerous. The words stung, but Diane refused to flinch. She had heard worse in combat zones. She had faced commanders who doubted her, colleagues who questioned her presence in special forces. Tonight was no different, just another battlefield where the enemy wore ties instead of uniforms. The first witness was called Jake Morrison. He described Harrison's harassment of Diane, the suspicious maintenance orders, the security logs showing camera tampering. Under cross-examination, the defense tried to paint him as biased, a security guard with a crush on the janitor, but Jake's calm, steady tone cut through. I respect Diane because she treats people like people. That's more than I can say for Harrison Steele. Next came Angela Foster, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each sentence. She told the jury about overhearing Harrison's phone calls, about his threats, about the underground meeting of employees who had risked their jobs to support Diane. The defense tried to break her, suggesting she was young, impressionable, seeking attention. Angela looked directly at Harrison. The only person seeking attention is the man who thought he could buy violence and call it business. The jury scribbled notes. Finally, Diane herself was called. She stood, shoulders squared, walking to the witness stand with the same purposeful stride she had once used walking into Afghan villages. Sworn in, she faced the jury. Miss Porter, the prosecutor began gently, can you tell the court what happened that night in your own words? Diane inhaled slowly, her voice steady. 7 men came to that garage with one purpose, to break me. They weren't there to rob the building or vandalize property. They came for me. They called me by name. They said I had forgotten my place, and I defended myself because I wasn't going to let them decide my worth. Her words carried across the silent courtroom. No theatrics, no dramatics, just truth, plain and unshakable. The defense pounced. Miss Porter, isn't it true that you brought a firearm to work, that you were prepared for violence? Yes, Diane said calmly. Why would a janitor need a firearm? I'm not just a janitor. I'm a soldier. And soldiers prepare for danger, even when others choose not to see it coming. The defense lawyer smirked, sensing an opening. So you admit you were expecting a fight? I admit, Diane said, her gaze fixed on the jury, that when powerful men threaten women like me, the fight is never far behind. The only question is whether we stand or bow. I stood. A murmur rippled through the spectators. Even the judge's gavel couldn't silence the electricity running through the room. Outside, cameras captured every twist. Commentators debated endlessly. Some called Diane a hero, a symbol of resilience. Others called her reckless, a dangerous precedent. But in barbershops, in church basements, in family living rooms, ordinary people nodded quietly. They knew what it meant to be told to stay in your place. They knew the price of dignity. Diane's story was their story. As the trial stretched on, evidence piled higher. Tom Peterson's digital records, Patricia's HR files, video footage showing Harrison's meeting with Castellano, money exchanged, words clear as daylight. Make sure she learns respect. And yet, even as the walls closed in, Harrison sat smug at the defense table, as if convinced his wealth could still twist the truth. His pale eyes darted across the jury, searching for one sympathetic face, one person who would doubt Diane enough to let him walk free. But the tide was turning. Each witness, each document, each video chipped away at the fortress of privilege he had built around himself. The courtroom became a mirror of society, one man's entitlement against one woman's courage, a battle not just of facts, but of values. When the prosecution rested, Diane sat quietly, hands folded, listening to the hum of the courtroom. She thought of every soldier she had buried, every battle she had fought. Tonight wasn't about bullets or blood. Tonight was about truth. And truth, she knew, was the sharpest weapon of all. As court adjourned for the day, protesters outside lit candles. Some prayed, some sang. And in the soft glow of those flames, Diane felt the same unity she had felt in the desert under starlight, shoulder to shoulder with her unit. She wasn't alone, not anymore. The firestorm was only beginning. Tomorrow would bring more headlines, more arguments, more attempts to twist her story. But for the first time, Diane believed the system might listen not because it wanted to, but because too many voices now refused to be silenced. By dawn, the courthouse steps had become a stage. Satellite vans lined the block, antennas pointed skyward like soldiers ready for transmission. Reporters held microphones against the chill, their voices competing for dominance. The steel trial enters its third day. Janitor or warrior? The debate divides a nation. Corporate heir accused of conspiracy, what does this mean for boardroom culture? Diane Porter's name was everywhere. It trended on Twitter, flashed across cable news tickers, became hashtags on TikTok videos spliced with protest chants and courtroom sketches. But not all attention was kind. On one network, a conservative anchor leaned forward, eyebrows arched. We have to ask the hard question, was this an act of self-defense, or a vigilante veteran unleashing military training in a civilian space? His guest, a business lobbyist, nodded gravely. If every employee with grievances brings a weapon to work, where does it end? On another channel, a black pastor thundered from his pulpit, his sermon broadcast live. When a black woman defends her dignity, they call her dangerous. When a millionaire tries to buy violence, they call him ambitious. That's the hypocrisy on trial here, not just Harrison Steele. The contrast was sharp. Diane wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She had become the battleground where America's deepest wounds, race, gender, power, class, were being fought in headlines and hashtags. Angela Foster scrolled through her phone in disbelief one night at Diane's apartment. "Look at this," she said, showing a viral clip. It was Diane, testifying in court, her words clear and calm. Everyone deserves respect regardless of their job title. The video had been edited with swelling music and subtitles, viewed over 12 million times in 48 hours. But then Angela flipped to another video. Harrison's face filled the screen, taken from a jailhouse interview. "I'm the real victim here," he said, his voice dripping with entitlement. "That woman escalated things. I tried to manage an employee problem, and now my family's name is being dragged through the mud. It's a witch hunt." Diane leaned back, weary. He still believes he's untouchable. Jake crossed his arms, and some people still believe him. Look at these comments. He scrolled through an online forum. Some users called Diane a hero. Others wrote venom. She should have stayed in her place. Another angry black woman playing the victim card. The words weren't new to Diane. She had seen them on soldiers' faces overseas, in HR offices, in stares from strangers. But seeing them multiplied on screens, carried on waves of data across the country, cut deeper. Racism had always been personal. Now it was amplified by algorithms. Outside Steel Industries headquarters, protests ragged. Workers carried signs reading, "Dignity has no dress code," and "Janitors are human too." On the 32nd floor, executives watched nervously as their building became a symbol of corporate arrogance. Some issued quiet statements supporting Diane. Others distanced themselves, fearing fallout. Patricia Kim became a reluctant spokesperson. Interviewed on national TV, she explained the years of ignored complaints, the NDAs, the cover-ups. "Diane Porter is not the first woman Harrison targeted," she said. "She is the first who refused to quit." Her calm voice carried the weight of truth. The host nodded, visibly moved. Still, political backlash brewed. A congressman thundered in a hearing, "We cannot normalize violence in the workplace. Veterans like Miss Porter deserve respect, but arming janitors is not the answer." His words spread online, drawing both praise and ridicule. Memes circulated. Diane's face superimposed on a superhero cape with the caption, "Armed with Dignity." In living rooms across America, families debated. Some fathers warned their daughters, "Don't ever talk back to your boss." Others told their sons, "Respect is earned, not bought." In black households, mothers whispered to daughters, "That woman could be me." In veterans groups, soldiers raised their glasses, murmuring, "That woman is us." The media storm seeped into every corner of Diane's life. Reporters camped outside her apartment. Photographers followed her from grocery stores to church. Friends she hadn't spoken to in years texted their support. Strangers sent letters, some thanking her, some warning her to watch her back. One evening, exhausted, Diane found herself on her balcony staring at the city skyline. Angela joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "How do you handle it?" Angela asked softly. Diane sipped in silence, then answered. "In Afghanistan, we had a saying, 'The enemy sees what you let them see.' Right now, the world is watching me. I don't get to show fear." "But aren't you scared?" Angela pressed. Diane's eyes glistened in the city light. "Terrified. But fear doesn't mean weakness. Fear just means the battle matters." Her words spread again, this time not in headlines but in whispered retellings, in quiet inspiration. Teachers repeated them to students. Activists scrawled them on posters. Fear doesn't mean weakness. Fear means the battle matters. Meanwhile, Harrison's legal team grew desperate. They leaked private details about Diane, her failed relationships, her therapy sessions, her struggles to adjust after deployment. Tabloids splashed lurid headlines, "Troubled Soldier" or "Brave Survivor." It was character assassination dressed as journalism. Yet for every smear, more people rose in defense. Veterans organizations released statements. Women's groups organized rallies. Even celebrities tweeted number "Justice for Diane," amplifying her cause beyond anything she had imagined. But with fame came danger. One night, Jake intercepted a threatening letter slid under Diane's door. "You should have stayed in your place. Next time, no cameras." Police increased patrols, but Diane knew what it meant. Racism didn't fade under floodlights. It hid in shadows, waiting for silence. And yet, even as threats grew, something else grew stronger: solidarity. At Steel Industries, custodial workers who had once avoided eye contact with Diane now nodded with pride. "You're fighting for us," one whispered. At the courthouse, strangers stopped her with tears in their eyes. "Thank you for standing tall." By the time the trial neared its end, Diane's story wasn't just a headline. It was a movement, a question echoing in every corner of America: what is dignity worth? And as Diane prepared for the final days in court, she realized something profound. She had started this fight alone. But now, she carried an army not of soldiers with rifles, but of ordinary people armed with hope, truth, and the refusal to bow. The media frenzy hadn't destroyed her. It had transformed her. And in that transformation, Harrison Steele's greatest weapon, his power to isolate, had shattered. The war was far from over. But for the first time, Diane knew she wasn't just surviving, she was leading. The courtroom was so quiet that Diane could hear the clock ticking on the far wall. 12 jurors filed back into their seats, faces drawn tight, carrying the weight of weeks of testimony. Outside, chants from protesters filtered faintly through the heavy walls. "Justice for Diane, justice for workers." Cameras waited like vultures on the courthouse steps. Diane sat with her hands folded in her lap, posture straight, her heart steady but her palms damp. Angela gripped her arm for courage, and Jake sat beside them, jaw tight, ready for whatever storm the next few minutes would bring. Across the aisle, Harrison Steele leaned back in his chair with studied arrogance, as if the jury's decision was a mere formality. His lawyers whispered confidently. He still believed his last name was stronger than the truth. "All rise." The judge's voice carried authority as the jurors settled. The forewoman stood, a middle-aged black woman whose eyes briefly met Diane. Something passed between them: solidarity, recognition, quiet respect. "Have you reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor." The paper was handed over, unfolded, read aloud in a voice that felt like thunder in Diane's chest. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit assault and attempted murder, we find the defendant, Harrison Steele, guilty." Gasps erupted. Harrison's head snapped toward the jury, disbelief painted across his face. His lawyers froze, their arguments crumbling like ash. The forewoman continued. "On the charge of workplace harassment and abuse of authority, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty." Each word struck like a hammer. By the time the verdict was finished, Harrison's empire lay in ruins. The judge banged the gavel for order as the gallery erupted. Cheers, sobs, chants, relief spilling out of throats that had carried too much silence for too long. Diane sat motionless, tears pressing at the edges of her vision, but she refused to let them fall. Soldiers don't cry in the battlefield. But this wasn't just her battlefield, it was everyone's. Harrison shot up, veins pulsing in his neck. "This is a sham," he shouted. "I'm Steele. Do you hear me? My family built this city. You can't do this to me." Bailiffs closed in, pinning his arms as his fury spilled unchecked. The spectacle was grotesque, a man drowning in his own entitlement. His pale blue eyes searched wildly for allies, for anyone who would still bow to his name. But no one moved. Even the executives who had once nodded along with his cruelty sat stone-faced, unwilling to tether themselves to his sinking ship. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Steele, you will control yourself. This court has spoken." Diane finally let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Not triumph, not vengeance, just release. The weight she had carried for months, years shifted. Not vanished, but lightened enough for her lungs to expand fully for the first time. Reporters spilled into the hallway before she even left the courtroom. Microphones thrust forward, voices overlapping. "Diane, how do you feel? Do you regret your actions that night? What does this mean for workers across America?" Diane paused at the courthouse steps, the sea of faces before her divided between cameras and candles, anger and admiration. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence work for her, the same silence that had once unsettled enemies in desert combat zones. And then she said simply, "I regret that it came to this. I regret that 7 men lost their lives because one man couldn't see another human being as worthy of respect. But I do not regret standing up for myself. Every worker deserves dignity. That is what this verdict means. That dignity cannot be bought, silenced, or destroyed." The crowd roared. Hashtags bloomed online in seconds. Number "dignity cannot be destroyed" trended across platforms before the sun set. But even in victory, Diane knew this wasn't the end. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, medals tucked neatly back in their box, she whispered a prayer for the men she had killed. Not forgiveness because they had made their choice, but acknowledgement. They had been pawns in a game of power, sent to prove a point, and they had paid with their lives. Her phone buzzed with messages, veterans thanking her for showing strength, mothers thanking her for showing courage, strangers thanking her for surviving. But one message made her pause. It came from the widow of one of the attackers. "He made terrible choices, but thank you for not letting his death be meaningless. I hope your fight changes something, so no one else's family has to endure this." Diane closed her eyes, clutching the phone. That was the weight of justice. It never came without scars. Meanwhile, Harrison Steele's downfall was splashed across every headline. Corporate heir sentenced to 15 years. From boardroom to prison cell. The fall of Harrison Steele. His empire crumbled. Lawsuits from victims piled high. Shareholders distanced themselves. Steele Industries, once a monument to power, was forced into restructuring. But Diane's name outshone his. She was invited to speak at universities, honored by veteran groups, asked to consult on workplace safety policies. Politicians quoted her words in speeches. Civil rights leaders compared her stance to Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her seat. She was becoming a symbol she never asked to be. In quiet moments, she questioned it. Was she a hero, or just a woman who refused to bow? Did it matter? The world was listening, and if her story could shift the scales of justice even a little, then perhaps it was worth the sleepless nights, the therapy sessions, the memories of bullets sparking off concrete in that garage. The verdict had ended Harrison's reign, but it had also ignited something larger, a reckoning in workplaces across the nation. Employees began speaking up about harassment, about racism, about the quiet cruelties that festered in hallways and lobbies. Companies were forced to review their policies, not out of goodwill, but out of fear that another Diane Porter might rise within their walls. For Diane, the trial's end wasn't a conclusion. It was a call to arms, not with weapons, but with words, with policies, with solidarity. That night, standing on her balcony, Angela beside her, Jake below guarding the building, Diane looked out at the city lights. The skyline glittered like medals pinned on a uniform, but Diane knew better. Cities, like soldiers, carried scars, and justice wasn't a medal, it was a duty. "The verdict is done," Angela whispered. No, Diane replied softly. The verdict is just the beginning. 3 months after the verdict, the Steel Industries Tower still loomed over downtown Atlanta, but it was no longer a monument to untouchable wealth. The marble lobby where Harrison had once staged his humiliations now carried a different kind of energy. Employees walked with their heads higher. Posters on bulletin boards announced, "Zero tolerance for harassment." Custodial staff, once invisible, now received nods of acknowledgement, greetings in the morning, even thank yous. It wasn't perfection. Change never was, but it was movement. And that movement began with Diane Porter. Her story had not faded after the cameras left. It had multiplied. News specials chronicled her journey from soldier to janitor to survivor. Documentaries dissected the trial. College students wrote essays about her as a modern-day symbol of resistance. Workers across industries cited her case when filing complaints, saying, "If Diane Porter could stand up, so can I." Angela had become her unofficial manager, fielding emails from advocacy groups, booking speaking events, and handling media requests. "You're trending again," she told Diane one morning, scrolling through her phone. "This video of you saying, 'Fear means the battle matters,' just passed 20 million views." Diane sighed, sipping her coffee. "I never asked to be a slogan." Angela smiled. "Maybe not, but slogans inspire people. And right now, they need you." Her apartment, once quiet and lonely, had transformed into a command center. Files stacked high on the kitchen table, letters from supporters pinned to the walls, post-it notes with phone numbers of organizers, journalists, and lawyers. Jake often dropped by with updates from the growing circle of allies. Patricia sent drafts of policy frameworks, aiming to bring change not just to steel industries, but to corporate America as a whole. But with visibility came risk. Diane still received threats, emails dripping with racial hatred, voicemails warning her she had stirred the wrong pot. Police investigated, but Diane knew better. Racism doesn't vanish with one verdict. It adapts, shifts, waits. That was the soldier's truth. And yet, something was undeniably shifting. At a town hall in Chicago, a group of janitors walked out of work after being harassed, chanting Diane's words, "Dignity cannot be destroyed." In New York, flight attendants invoked her story while pushing for stricter protections against abusive passengers. In small towns across the South, ordinary workers spoke her name in church basements and union halls, reminding each other that silence was no longer the only option. The ripple effect had become a wave. One afternoon, Diane stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., invited to testify before a congressional committee on workplace harassment and discrimination. Her navy blazer fit snugly, medals left at home, but her bearing unmistakably military. Cameras clicked, lights glared, lawmakers leaned forward. "Good afternoon," she began. Her voice carried steady through the chamber. "I am Diane Porter. For 2 years I was harassed at my job. For 2 years, I was told through words and through silence that I should accept disrespect because of my position, my gender, and my race. When I refused, I was nearly killed. 7 men died because one man thought my dignity was negotiable. It wasn't. It never is." Gasps, murmurs, scribbling pens, Diane pressed on. "This is not just my story. It is the story of countless workers whose complaints are buried under NDAs, whose voices are drowned out by power, whose dignity is treated as disposable. We cannot legislate respect, but we can legislate accountability, and it is time we did." The committee room erupted in applause, rare in such a space. Reporters rushed to capture her words. Headlines blazed that evening. Diane Porter calls for National Workplace Accountability Act. That night, sitting in her hotel room, Diane scrolled through reactions online. Some celebrated her bravery. Others sneered. But one comment caught her attention. "My mother worked 30 years as a cleaner. She died thinking no one cared about her voice. Diane Porter proved her wrong." Tears welled unbidden. Not for herself, but for all the unseen, unheard workers who deserved better. Meanwhile, steel industries restructured under new leadership. Harrison sat in a prison cell, stripped of his power, writing letters no one wanted to read. His downfall became a cautionary tale in business schools. Arrogance is expensive. But Diane's rise wasn't about revenge, it was about building something new. She launched Porter Security Consulting, focusing on workplace safety and anti-harassment training. Her first clients were her former colleagues, many of whom had quit steel industries and formed a worker-owned cooperative. She taught them how to recognize early signs of toxic leadership, how to document harassment, how to protect one another. Think of yourselves as a unit, she told them in one session. In the Army, we survive because no one fights alone. That principle works here too. No one gets abandoned. Not anymore. The consulting firm grew quickly. Calls poured in from universities, hospitals, corporations. Some wanted her expertise. Some wanted her image to polish their reputations. Diane declined those. "I'm not here for optics," she told Angela. "I'm here for change." In the evenings, when the work was done, she still wrestled with nightmares. The sound of gunfire in the garage, the look in the eyes of the men she had killed. Therapy helped, but healing was a slow march, not a sprint. Some nights she stood at her window, staring at the skyline, whispering the names of soldiers she had lost overseas, adding the nameless attackers to that list. But alongside the grief grew something else: resolve. At a community event in Atlanta, a little girl approached her shyly, clutching her mother's hand. "Miss Porter," the girl said softly, "my teacher showed us your video. I want to be strong like you." Diane knelt, smiling gently. "Strength isn't about fighting, sweetheart. It's about knowing when to stand tall, and you already have that inside you." The girl's smile lit up the room. In that moment, Diane understood that her story wasn't about violence. It was about courage. About planting seeds of dignity in places where the soil had been poisoned by racism and power. The ripple effect was bigger than she had imagined, and it was still spreading. 1 year after the verdict, the air in Atlanta carried the scent of spring rain and magnolia blossoms. The steel industries tower still scraped the sky, but the name on its glass doors had changed. It was now Unity Tower, a rebranded symbol under new leadership that promised transparency and accountability. For most, it was just another corporate building, but for Diane Porter, it would always be the battlefield where her life had changed forever. She stood across the street, hands tucked into the pockets of her navy coat, watching employees stream in and out. Some carried lunch bags, others coffee cups, a few hurried with files clutched to their chests. They didn't look over their shoulders anymore. They didn't whisper nervously in the lobby. It was a small thing, but Diane noticed. Freedom always shows in posture. Angela approached, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You're staring at it like it's an old enemy," she teased, handing one to Diane. "It is," Diane said softly, "but also a teacher. Every scar teaches something." They walked together toward the converted warehouse that now housed Porter Security Consulting. Inside, walls were lined with framed photos. Thank you notes from janitors, letters from veterans, snapshots of community events where Diane had spoken. In the center of the lobby hung a plaque: "Dignity cannot be destroyed." Jake was already there, briefing a group of young security trainees. His voice carried steady authority, transformed from night guard to respected instructor. Patricia sat in her office drafting a new workplace policy model that was already gaining traction in Fortune 500 companies. Bobby, the maintenance supervisor, had just expanded his cooperative to 3 states. Tom was on a video call with a city official, advising on cybersecurity for municipal systems. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving, together. Later that afternoon, Diane received a letter delivered by hand. It was from the Department of Defense, embossed with the insignia of the Army. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the words: "In recognition of extraordinary civilian courage and commitment to the values of the United States Armed Forces, Staff Sergeant, Ret 9, Diane Porter, is awarded the Civilian Service Medal." Her breath caught, not because of the medal itself, she already had drawers of them, but because of what it represented. The army that once sent her to deserts and mountains was now honoring the battle she had fought at home, a battle not with rifles and insurgents, but with prejudice and power. Angela found her staring at the letter. "Are you going to accept it?" Diane smiled faintly. "I think this one I will." That evening, she hosted a small gathering at her apartment. Angela, Jake, Patricia, and a few others crowded into the modest space, laughter and the smell of takeout filling the room. On the wall, Diane had hung the service medal next to a framed photo of her old unit from Afghanistan. The juxtaposition struck her: combat abroad, courage at home, different wars, same fight for dignity. As the night wore on, Angela asked the question that had been lingering: Do you ever regret it? That night, in the garage, Diane's eyes grew distant, the sound of gunfire flickering at the edges of memory. She took a slow breath. I regret that it had to happen. I regret that 7 families lost sons, brothers, fathers, but I don't regret defending myself. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be here. And none of this, she gestured around the room, at the people, the warmth, would exist. Silence settled for a moment, heavy with truth. Then Jake raised his glass. To Diane, for teaching us that respect isn't given, it's demanded. Glasses clinked. The cheer was quiet but powerful. Months later, Diane found herself on a stage at a university commencement ceremony, invited as the keynote speaker. Hundreds of graduates sat in rows, caps and gowns shimmering in the sunday. Parents fanned themselves in the stands, cameras ready. Diane stepped to the podium, her voice carrying with practiced calm. Some of you will walk into boardrooms. Some of you will sweep floors. Some will wear uniforms, others suits. But let me tell you something I've learned the hard way. Your worth is not defined by your title, your paycheck, or the size of your office. Your worth is defined by the dignity you carry and the courage you show when someone tries to take it from you. She paused, letting the words sink in. The graduates leaned forward, listening not to a celebrity or a politician, but to a woman who had lived her truth in blood and silence. Fear doesn't mean you're weak, she continued. Fear means the battle matters, and when the battle comes to you, and it will stand tall, not just for yourself, but for those who can't. Because dignity isn't personal, it's collective. When one person stands, others find the courage to rise too. The applause was thunderous, echoing across the campus lawn. For Diane, it wasn't about recognition. It was about planting seeds in soil that would outlive her. Later, as she walked off stage, a young graduate with brown skin and anxious eyes approached her. "Miss Porter," he said, voice trembling, "I'm starting a job where I'll be the only black person on the team. I'm scared. What if they treat me like I don't belong?" Diane placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then remember this. You belong because you're there. Not because they let you in, not because you fit their picture. You belong because you earned your place. Never forget that. And if they try to make you forget, stand tall. That's what changes the world." The young man nodded, tears brimming. Diane smiled. Another ripple, another torch passed. That night, back in her apartment, Diane sat quietly with her journal. She wrote not about the trial, not about Harrison, not about medals or speeches. She wrote about a little girl who told her she wanted to be strong, about a widow who thanked her for giving meaning to tragedy, about a young graduate ready to face his own battlefield. She closed the journal, whispering into the stillness. The fight never ends, but neither does the hope. Outside, the city lights flickered like stars brought down to earth. For the first time in years, Diane felt at peace not because the world was fixed, but because she had helped bend it, even slightly, toward justice. Her story wasn't just survival, it was legacy. And as long as dignity lived in even one heart, the battle was never truly lost. And so, Diane Porter's journey comes full circle. From the quiet corridors of steel industries to the blinding lights of the courtroom, from fear in a parking garage to courage on the national stage, her story reminds us that dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. She taught us that strength isn't just about fists or medals, but about refusing to bow when someone tells you to forget your place. She showed us that racism, no matter how deeply rooted, cannot stand against truth spoken with clarity and courage. And she reminded us of something powerful, that when one person dares to rise, others find the strength to rise too. Diane's legacy is not just her own. It belongs to every worker who has ever felt invisible, every voice that was ever silenced, and every soul who has ever whispered, "I deserve respect." Her victory was not perfect, not painless, but it was real, and real victories change the world, one ripple at a time. To all of you who have stayed with me through this story, thank you. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, for carrying Diane's courage into your own life. If her journey touched your heart, let it be a reminder. You too can stand tall. You too can change something. I'm deeply grateful for your time and your support. If you found meaning in this story, please consider giving it a like, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing to this channel. Your voice matters here, and your support helps us continue bringing powerful stories of resilience and justice to light. Until next time, stay strong, stay compassionate, and remember, dignity cannot be destroyed. Thank you.